going to start with a couple questions just to kind of seed things. So the first one is, acknowledging that you're the head of engineering at Asana, which, there's a lot of planning that happens in Asana. I'm a user of Asana, I use it at many companies, and I'm sure many of the folks on this call have used it, love it. How does Asana approach setting, tracking, and reporting on goals at the company and team level? And how has that changed or not since working remotely?
Yeah, as you can imagine, Asana's mission is to help humanity thrive by helping teams work together effortlessly. And that's all about creating alignment, creating clarity. If you walk the corridors when we're back in office or at Asana, you'll hear the word clarity a lot. And in our view, a great way to create a lot of alignment is have a lot of clarity around what the goals are at the company level, what are the goals of the sales team. If an engineer wants to look up the goals of the same sales team, they can go do that. So alignment comes from clarity, because in general, if you hire people who are aligned with your mission, whatever your mission is of your organization, and then you transparently communicate about goals at all levels, then there is automatic alignment that is possible if individuals choose to align with that. So that's what we believe in while building our product, but also for the company. And so the important thing is clarity of purpose, clarity of plan, and clarity of responsibility. So clarity of purpose is basically why are we doing a thing? A clarity of plan is how will we go about it? What are we building? How will we go about it? And clarity of responsibility is for each individual, what's their role? What are they leading? What are they contributing to this plan? And for us, we follow the objectives and key results, OKR methodology, which we already have some chatted about on the chat. And we basically set objectives at the company level through a bottom-up and top-down process. We kind of take input and try to merge that together. And then teams individually make commitments to the company of, here are our goals, here are our key results that we are signing up for towards these objectives. So that's our process for creating clarity. And these things go from very high level at the company level, which one of our objective is to be public readiness, ready to get into the public markets. And then there's a lot of work going across compliance, finance systems that all aim towards that objective. And there's like individual tasks which are assigned to one person, which might be one day tasks, which then can be bubbled up all the way to that objective. So that is that's kind of in a nutshell. Like, I'm happy to get into more details. I assume that as we answer more questions, we'll get into more details about the process we follow at Asana as well. When we went in shelter in place, I will differentiate between normal work from home, distributed team. When you try to build that as a culture, that's a very different thing than what happened. We went from, we are hiring people to work together in an office, to, hey, everybody, you cannot leave your houses, and let's try to do work while we are in that situation. So it's a very different thing from saying, how do you do goal setting for distributed teams is a very different question from how do you do goal setting when you do shelter in place for a pandemic. So what we did was, first of all, we communicated that to teams that, look, we assume this will have an impact. Let's not pretend that we can just keep going the way we were going and we'll get the same result. So we asked teams to take a couple of weeks to just get a lay of the land. What's the environment like? What is the impact on individual team members? what does velocity look like in this new environment, and then recommit to different goals maybe. I mean, either change the timing of the goals or change the focus. And we did that kind of at the individual team levels, but also at the product roadmap levels. Let's assume that we can deliver everything at exactly the right time that we had planned before. What's the 3 things that are the most important that we will make changes within teams? We will change which teams are working on what to achieve those 3 things. Let's pick those things out. So that's the kind of thinking we went about. But I think we were helped a lot by having this clarity as the model that we pursued even before shelter in place as we went through that shift.
It makes sense. It's interesting having the way that you describe it, actually very well articulated. Alignment and clarity is kind of the 2 reasons why you have goals. I'm sure that there are people who are in this conversation that, they don't have OKRs, they don't have any kind of goal setting process whatsoever. They kind of just do what their manager, their CEO says at all times. And while that might give them some clarity and maybe even alignment, like, it doesn't necessarily review the details of like purpose and plan and responsibility, which I think are also very well articulated. You also mentioned like being bottoms up and top down and having both of those things, right? I think some folks in the conversation might find that things are only top down and that really there is no bottom up. It's just do what you're told. And there may be some organizations for which that can work, but there's certainly things that you miss by not having the wisdom for the folks that are kind of in the field, if you will. And the shelter in place, that's an interesting one, because I've seen certainly in the earlier days of the shelter in place kind of these conversations where like the only goal as an individual you should have is to just survive and to make it to the end, right?
Yeah, I think that there's truth to that, right?
Right? Because we're all like, as you described, like having an expectation of how you're going to work and then all of a sudden finding yourself in this other way of being. I mean, it seems very astute to maybe lower your expectations a little bit about what you're going to be capable of as a team. So sounds like you've acknowledged that at Asana, which I think is very sound.
And I mean, I think the way I would approach it is still be ambitious, right? But take the time to reevaluate. The only answer isn't we'll do less, but at least acknowledge that is a possible answer and we'll be okay with it.
Sure. No, that totally makes sense. So kind of in general, more topic of goal setting. So what are some of the roadblocks that people run into when implementing, let's just say, an OKR system or other types of goal setting models that you might want to mention?
Yeah. So one of the things you said was that a lot of organizations and even some largest and successful ones aren't even trying to set goals and OKRs, right? So I guess that's one impediment is there has to be a desire and a belief that having goals and having this clarity will make us better. So that probably for many people there is no evangelization needed. It seems like a very logical thing that if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably not get there. But if you so that's one impediment, and I don't know how to address that because there isn't a desire or belief to do that in the first place. I think even a lot of teams where there is a desire and a belief that goals are important, they run into a lot of roadblocks as well. And the primary one that I have experienced in organizations and I've seen when I talk to customers is the complete separation of the planning process and the execution process, right? So you have this, companies do have this planning process. They dedicate some time to it and put some effort in creating these documents, which lay out, these are our plans. And then teams are like, okay, we'll keep doing what we were doing. Thank you for the plan. And the execution just starts to immediately go in a different direction. And that direction is not, it's not like people are malicious, right? People are doing what they've seen works. And the sales team is like, yeah, I know what I was selling. It was working, and I'll keep doing that at a different level. And I talk to my boss about what to deliver. And so a lot of those that goals, people review it quarterly, 6 months, but they are in such disparate places that if you want to see how the sales team is doing, you kind of go into their tool and system to understand what they're doing. If you want to see what the product and engineering team is building, you probably have to go through a bunch of emails to understand where a particular project is, or you need to have a project manager kind of painfully go through information to come up with a status report. And as soon as they come up with it, it's immediately stale. So those are some of the challenges that I've seen organizations have in implementing anything like the OKR model. And I don't want to paint it as dire and this is not workable. I'm talking about successful organizations here. I'm not talking about this is so you can make it work, but I do think that having that clarity makes you more agile, because you're like, oh, we are making this decision. What is the input to this decision? And I just need to look at the goals of my organization to give me an input into how do I decide A versus B. Maybe A is more aligned with that, the goal of the organization.
Yeah, so this is interesting because company that I was recently at before the startup that I began this past year, Doctor.com, right? I was CTO there for 5 years, and we had an OKR process. But I found actually when I left, and this happens all the time when you leave an organization, and then like something that you thought everybody loved suddenly stops doing that thing. And actually, like just the goal setting and planning process and kind of the religion, for lack of better words, of OKRs, like kind of like fell off after I left. And when I reflected on it and having some conversations with folks there, I realized that the experience that a lot of folks had, not everyone, but a lot of folks had doing the OKR process was that they would have these, they do it quarterly. They, set this, make these objectives, all these key results, and then they get to the end of the quarter and then they're like, oh yeah, like that one objective, I totally didn't even do anything there, or they found that, like, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, like you fast forward 1 week, 2 weeks from when you set these goals and something significant happens, or, a deal falls through that you thought was going to go through or whatever. And you realize you have to, like, one of those goals is just not going to happen at all, or some other goal that wasn't on the list is actually now critically important. Like for companies that are going that quickly, where things are changing that quickly, is there a way to make OKRs, to make them like work?
Yeah, so I already said that the organizations which are successful, which are doing this disconnect thing. And the question is, well, are they just wasting their time? And I think that the thing that it's important to acknowledge is that the purpose of that OKR process that they are following is not really execution. It is resource planning. It's you come up with a plan, and you come up with the best looking plan to get the most resources. So you're playing a game. And you present that plan, you get the resources, and then you do what you really plan to do with that. And you can be successful in that way. That's part of the disconnect. So I think, yeah, the keys to, in my view, of having these two things come together is for OKRs to be alive. They have to be changeable. There doesn't have to be like, we signed up for this, now we'll die on that hill, even if the environment changes. You can't have that belief. Eventually it's a way of providing teams with a way to measure themselves, rather than a way for management to measure teams.
Interesting.
Right? So that's one of the things. They have to be alive. Teams have to be able to change them. They have to be at the center of execution. They can't be off at the side in a separate system that teams are not using to talk about their work. the further apart and the more systems you have for these things, the further away these things are going to get. And they have to be connected to the actual work, the place where I say that, oh, I'm done with this part of the framework to build this other feature, where you're saying that has to kind of some way connect to that goal.
It makes sense. And I particularly appreciate this kind of resource planning over execution, that's such a big part of why you do it, because then what that means is even if, you don't hit all of those OKRs or whatever, the magical 70%, 80%, whatever you're aiming for, that you're still able to plan resources, which is very important. So that's great. I'd love to get into some of these questions. So
yeah,
this one's been upvoted quite a bit. What's your advice on setting goals for your team when you have only been given vague or ambitious goals? I'm sure many folks can have experienced this or are experiencing it now.
Yeah. So I think that in general for leaders, and I say leaders broadly, it's eng managers, it is individual contributors on teams are leaders and should be trying to lead. One of your key responsibilities as a leader is to create clarity out of ambiguity. You should acknowledge that and you should believe that. And so first of all, I would approach it as this is an opportunity. This is not just a challenge. It's an opportunity for you to take something vague and then give your team clarity on this is what we are going to do about it. This is the big goal, but here's what we are going to do about it. And communicate that in both directions clearly. Communicate that to your stakeholders that here's what I've been asked to do, and this is our plan, and this is what we'll actually deliver. I think you'll get a lot of credibility by creating that for your stakeholders as well as for your team. And there is a level of you have to then protect your team to be able to deliver on those things, because if you don't then meet your commitments, that doesn't provide value. And then hopefully you're in an organization where you can give this feedback to people setting these ambiguous goals for you as well. To be like, hey, I'd love a little more clarity about how my team fits in, and maybe affect change. And again, a lot of things at Asana are driven by individuals who are like, this is not great. We can make it great. And I'm going to change this, not just for my team, but more broadly. And if you create an environment where people can run with that and have their ideas be evaluated, it's not like everybody with a passion gets to change the organization completely, but have those ideas be evaluated. If they are able to evangelize, help them evangelize some of the ideas if you think it's the right idea. But you can also affect change beyond your team. And if that's not the case, maybe think about a different organization where you might be able to do that.
Fair enough. It seems like a theme of a lot of what you're just sharing kind of relates to like empowerment of the individual, right? In terms of the ability to surface concerns, to give feedback, to push back, to create clarity out of ambiguity at the individual level, even if you don't have it from the what's above you.
Yeah, and there's empowerment and there's just reality, right? There are people who are closest to the problem who right. Are the best people to decide exactly what steps to take. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have the highest level objective be a little vague and not have the whole execution plan not be fully cascaded out, because that would be very top down and it would be very hard it would take months to assemble that plan together. And it will be very fragile as the environment changes. If you instead have a high level goal, which is ambitious, which is has input from teams about, yes, we think we have an idea of how we could move towards this. You communicate that clearly and let teams come up with a plan. And then you do a step of ensuring that what the teams are saying and what the plan and the goal is, those all add up. Right? You have to do that some level of due diligence there. But I think that the higher level plan having ambiguity might be by design, and you should make sure you understand that or you clarify that. It's good if it's by design. If it's bad if just people are saying stuff to you about the direction you should be going in.
Well, that definitely makes sense. So creating clarity out of ambiguity happening at any level, and if you don't have it from above or you're given ambiguity from above, helping to create clarity for your team, protecting them as you mentioned, and then giving feedback. I imagine that there may be some folks who are listening that may say, this sounds like a very like Western or United States style of like self-empowerment and everything else. And at the same time, I reflect on this only because, I'm sure you've worked with teams as well where respect for hierarchy is culturally incredibly important, and questioning authority is like this very dangerous, risky thing. But it sounds like what you're alluding to is like, you need to get visibility from the ground, regardless of what the culture is, if you want to make some of the right decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is the way you do some of these things will be different and have cultural aspects, right? So there is you're taking you've been given a direction that is ambiguous. I think acknowledging that with the person giving you the direction of, okay, do I understand you? This is what you're asking me to do, and this is what I'll translate to. I think that doesn't seem very culturally different to me, but you can communicate. You probably communicate in somewhat different ways depending on what seems appropriate. And then, how you bring about change, that might be very, very different. It might be okay in some cultures for you to send a task or an email or whatever your mode of communication is to the CEO saying, hey, this isn't great, and this is how I think it should be. And in other cultures, it might be you should only go to your manager with your idea, and you should get their buy-in, and then you go up the chain. And not making a value judgment, but I think that in all cultures, that change does come about. How does it come about? Think about it and try to bring it about.
Very well said. That's great. We just had one that just got bumped to the top here. Our engineering teams are used to product-related goals set by the CEO, him or herself. What advice do you have for a newly installed senior manager looking to set non-product goals, for example, around process, quality, mentorship, etc.?
I think you have to figure out how much buy-in you need from the CEO themselves for some of the process quality mentorship goals. It might be that the CEO is like, I don't care how these are executed, and there's good things you're talking about, go do them. It might be that, yes, there is 10% time that we can devote to some other stuff you're talking about. There might be different, that's a whole spectrum that the person setting these product goals has. And part of the job in that case is getting that buy-in and alignment, as I was saying, for the ambiguous goals as well. And then the other part is evangelizing with the team and figuring out what is the most important thing. Does your team take a product goal and actually already deliver it at high quality? In that case, all you might want to do is put some metrics in place so that you're tracking it, and you will at least know when some of these things fall off. But it might not be the highest priority to set new goals around it because the team is already doing a good job. So you have to prioritize, and that's kind of the beauty of goal setting and OKRs is you have to prioritize and you figure out how much leeway you have. If you have 10% of the time, you can still prioritize and choose the one or two things that you want to change this quarter and this year. So that's the approach I'd take. And if the amount of time and space you have to pursue some of these other goals, will lead to worse results, or you go through them and you see worse results, then again, you go back and you do we need more time, and this is why, and you make a case for that.
Yep, and you kind of, as a general theme, right? Both feedback and then you're mentioning kind of if you see adverse results, kind of feedback and observation. Like look around you and see what's needed. You know, obviously you get these goals from the top, but if you yourself look around and you see something that's needed, that's missing, that hasn't been mentioned or said that you think matters, right? Like also a reasonable place to pull from, when you're creating goals.
Yeah, and I think the thing about culturally, you said understand the environment you're in, understand the team you're part of. It's for a lot of teams, it is a very different thing for somebody in the middle of the quarter to say, hey, we need to put everything else on hold because this high priority thing has come up. That leads to a lot of churn, a lot of discussion needed. However, if you find the right time and place and forum to bring up your idea, that's much easier. It's like everybody feels like, oh yeah, of course we want to do the right thing. And we plan for it and we'll do it next quarter or 3 quarters from now. And that's a much easier way to turn the ship than to try to do it as an urgent thing that causes more churn. So that's another part of it. There's kind of what is the timing, what is the forum, who are the stakeholders in talking about these goals, and then how do I turn these non-product goals into business goals? The reason to have quality is not because engineers want to build a lower number of crashes. You're actually spending time fixing those bugs. You're spending time triaging those bugs. Can you word those goals in terms of reduce the amount of time being spent on bug fixing from this to this? That has clear business value. That has clear monetary value that you can communicate. What is the process you're trying to improve? How can you take that and talk about its business value? Can you say something like, hey, I normally sign up for 3 features. If you let me institute this process, next year we'll be able to sign up for 4 features, but we'll only do 2 features this year, but we'll kind of build capacity permanently by doing a little less. It's not easy, but there's a marketing job that you have to do as well. And you might be able to quantify it, or you might be able to convince them through proxies, through other means of communicating that information.
And this is such an important lesson for engineers who are becoming engineering managers for the first time and have spent maybe a large portion of their career using logic and reason and things that are in front of them that are very black and white to make decisions, to now this place where you need to create influence, and like you were using the word marketing, right? Like there's this human emotional component that you have to be sensitive to. And I think what you're alluding to is like, it's not just about what your goals are or how you set them, but like the when you set them and in what environment and how you communicate them, and all of those interpersonal things matter sometimes more than necessarily the goals themselves in terms of ensuring a good outcome.
Right. And I think that one thing I do notice is people with engineering backgrounds will like, oh, I have this opinion, but I will not say it because it's not 100% provable. And I will only state it. And actually, a lot of times, once you're in a leadership position, people value that opinion that comes from experience, even though you're not like, you can't draw the line to that exact business outcome that'll be better. It's like, oh yeah, now I've heard it, and I've heard David believes this, and I value that. That can influence and change people's minds. And you should do due diligence before saying what your opinion is, but it doesn't need to be like, you don't have to be able to write out a proof of the validity of it for you to share it and influence things.
Makes sense. I'm going to try and get through more questions since there's a lot of them.
Sure.
So the first one is, should goals always have to be quantifiable?
Yeah, this is, I'll start with yes. You should have a way of measuring whether you met the goal or not. And I generally advise teams and work with teams to when we are setting a key result, we're saying this is a key result we'll achieve. It's actually better to spend the time upfront to decide how we'll know whether we hit it or not, than to argue about it when you're done with the project, or did we meet the goal or not? Because at that time it's very colored. Your vision is very colored by, am I being unfair? Am I giving myself too much leeway? Do I just want this to call this a green check mark? So it's better to figure out. But it's a. I think that the reason for this question and the reason for all the upvotes is it's not easy to quantify everything, right? You might have, we want to be more secure next year than we are this year. What does that mean? How can you quantify security? That's something that we talk about, think about, and there isn't a like solid answer of this is exactly how we're going to measure that we're more secure. But there is, when you break it down, you're like, we are doing this, this, and this. How do we call this project a success? What is our framework for choosing the work itself? So when we actually wrote out at Asana a document about key results, and we start with all goals should be quantifiable. And the first is business outcome. What number of customers got value because of the work you did? That's kind of the best way of quantifying something, because eventually we're building something for customers to use. So let's try to do that. If that's definitely not possible for every goal that you might pick, then you have something like, well, what are the metrics? And what metrics are we trying to move a metric? Are we trying to achieve a particular threshold? Something of that sort. Then you have SLAs type of quantifying. So you say, we don't want to have more than 3 strikes against our internal data availability metric goal. What does a strike mean? You just define what a strike means. An engineer has to spend a whole day trying to fix this problem. That's a strike. We don't want to have more than 3 of these. Now that's a quantified goal. You could have said it, we want our data quality to be high. And it's very hard to quantify it, so I'm not going to quantify it. But you can break that down and try to quantify it. And there are places where we actually say, and if something happens which we didn't predict, we might call this a fail anyway, even though the strikes didn't happen, right? You can build some more human judgment in, but I think you can quantify things. And then there is another category is just work product, right? This is what we're trying to build. If we build it by this date, we'll call this project a success, even though there isn't a lot of other quantifying that we'll do, because it's either not worth it or we don't think it's possible.
Yep.
So
my takeaway from that is, at the end, of like the trickle down process or the goal setting process, those goals need to be quantifiable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like the person at the top is even capable of quantifying it themselves. And that's where, again, like down the road, somebody needs to take the ambiguity and make it specific and quantifiable and measurable, at some point.
Right. And that, yes. And even for a specific goal where you're like, well, the end result of this is not something that is very easily measurable. Mm-hmm. Trying to look for proxies, trying to look for other ways of saying, is this successful or not? What will make us start with, what will as a team make us feel great about what we did over the past 3 months on this piece of work?
Yep.
And to me, that's one path to distilling it down to something quantifiable.
Yep.
And actually, we do use even that for some goals, which is we'll run a survey of our stakeholders. And we'll say, again, a data team is one example where it's like, we'll run a survey, we'll say, how did data science help you? And we want a score of at least 4. That's again, a quantifiable goal, even though the way data scientists are helping individual teams, they're so variable that you're not trying to measure that in terms of end customer results.
Yeah, makes sense. So we got about 15 minutes. I'm gonna keep running through. How do you set goals for high performers who are smarter than you?
You ask them to set the goals.
Fair enough, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think in general, you will have, uh, as a manager, if you want a team which has clarity and which has goals, then your job is not to create all goals from thin air. It's a collaborative process where people are contributing and setting goals. So very much, I mean, and they should be not just setting their goals, they should be setting your goals. If for at the team level, you should be getting that input. You should be leveraging the skill you have on your team as a leader.
Makes sense. This next one actually isn't quite related to goal setting. We'll do a quick version of this. What are the first week to-dos for an engineering manager joining a new company and a team that has never had an engineering manager previously? Quick version.
Yeah, that's. I assume this is a very early startup kind of scenario. I would start with uh, just going around the office talking to stakeholders, which are your reports are some of the stakeholders, your manager is a stakeholder, other people around the team are stakeholders, on why do we need an eng manager? I'm here. What value do you think I can add? That seems like the first thing, because this is a brand new, unique role, unless somebody has done that job before hiring you, of clearly defining. Even then, for a unique role, I would be happy for the person to spend the first week just understanding and defining the role better, and write your own JD essentially, and publish it. Tell the people, this is what I think my role is going to be, and this is how I'm going to be. So your first week is kind of, or longer, depends on the amount of friction there is on this in this new role, is defining what you're doing and then tweaking it as you go forward.
Seems like listening is a key part of that. It sounds like so that's
Yeah,
it's astute. Yeah.
yeah, and it depends. I mean, for new roles and for new leaders coming in, the first thing to consider is, are you being brought in to effect change, or are you being brought in to scale goodness that already exists? I mean, there's various reasons. There was a leadership gap on the team that you're being hired for. So understand what that need is. And so it's not just listening so that you can do what people are telling you. Listening so that you can understand the problem, so that you can change things, might also be one of the reasons for that listening. And it's not just the team, it's also the around the team. What can this team be doing better? That's your job as a new manager and new leader.
Excellent. What factors influence how much the dev team itself should be involved in the goal setting? Switching back to goal setting.
Yeah, no, I start with my belief that the dev team should be involved with goal setting, right? That's something I believe, because people building it, if they people are just more committed to goals that they participated in setting. If nothing else, even if the goal is not better because of their participation, if you don't believe that, if you believe that people are more committed to hitting a goal that they said that they participated in setting, you should be more participative in that exercise of setting the goal. But I think the factors which influence it include things like how much context they have. If you have a very domain heavy system that you're building, if you're building for the medical industry and you have hired PMs who have very specific domain knowledge, then it might be harder for the rest of the team to be involved in the goal setting for what are we building. I think in that environment, it's still the job of the organization to teach more people about the domain so that they can all be thinking about the problem that they're solving. Eventually, developers make decisions every day that change what it gets built a little bit. And the more they do it from a place of context and understanding the problem that the product is trying to solve, the better the product will be. So I would say you should be teaching it, but yeah, I think the amount of context, if you feel like somebody is not adding value to that process, it's like you shouldn't be involving them. You should be more teaching them and giving them that feedback so that they can participate in a better way.
It makes sense. It's interesting how like early on as an engineering manager, I found maybe for myself, but I also seen, right, that the tendency is, because you're used to controlling everything, the tendency is to want to control and to kind of like dictate, the goals, dictate like all the various things, right? But then, autonomy and meaning and purpose and all of that stuff matters so much to happiness and productivity for your team members. So giving them, the permission to be involved, having them be involved, but then also I think sometimes you swing the pendulum too far the other way, but as you're kind of saying, like, you need to have your eyes and ears out for when maybe they aren't, contributing in the way, or they have the knowledge to be able to contribute effectively in goal setting. So you have to assess that.
Yeah, I think that, as I said before, leveraging the smart folks on your team to achieve better results is what I'm saying, and having people participate. So it might not be in deciding what the product is, but when are we going to ship this thing? Figuring out what that plan looks like. The dev team can definitely and should participate in that. How are we going to build this thing? How long will that take? How can we do trade-offs on product to build it faster? That's something that you need the people building it to be involved.
Totally. And I found like when you're doing this for the first time, or you're not used to doing it before, like as an engineer, right? Sometimes just giving a very clear set of criteria. One of the good frameworks that I like to use is like SMART goals, right? Just the, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. I'm like looking it up on the side.
Yeah.
That's a, good framework. So what's your framework for choosing the top 3 goals for your company or organization team?
Yeah. So I don't know how much detail to get into here. So we
for the 1-minute version.
Yeah. So at the company level, the 3 inputs that go into what we build are, one is customer input, and we really have what I see is a fantastic way that we collect that information. We have something called the voice of customer process, where individual customer-facing teams all put their ideas into an Asana project or Asana projects for each team. That gets bubbled up. Then the leads in that area take all that input and actually try to stack rank it. And then eventually we come out with this list of 30 things that are the voice of the customer. This is the top thing that our customers and prospective customers want from us. So that's one big piece of input. The second is our product vision. Right, this company was founded with a very clear, hey, collaboration is broken. Teams don't know who is working on what. Let's try to fix this through a software product. So there's definitely a clear vision that we have on what we are trying to build, and we take the customer input to add to that or to sequence what we're delivering. And then there is just kind of what internally, what we can build, what is easy to build, what is all those are inputs that go into the process of figuring out what we are going to decide to do as a company. At the company level, we right now we have 9 objectives, so we just don't quite try to distill it down to 3. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell the process, and that's kind of already kind of a lot of bottom-up feedback, then some top-down kind of decisions on how to incorporate all this to create a business plan, and then there is the process of, okay, each team deciding how they are going to aim their work towards that objective. So individual team planning of how they align with the objectives.
Makes sense. We have about 5 more minutes, so probably time for a couple more questions. How do you balance between goals that an engineer might love versus the goals that are not so great, but from a love perspective, but that are important for the team or organization?
Yeah, couple of things. One is that creating clarity and hiring mission-oriented people solve this to an extent, right? So if you've hired people and you've sold them, here's what we're trying to build together, and they've come in for that reason, and then you tell them, hey, the thing that I told you we were going to build, here's an important component of what the problem that we're trying to solve, and you get to build that. There is just some intrinsic kind of alignment there, hopefully, when they understand the why. So I think part of your job as a manager is, again, sell them the opportunity and explain the why, and create systems where people can understand the why themselves. So I think that if you're in a situation where the work that is clearly the most important thing for the business and towards the mission, nobody wants to work on, there's a problem to solve. That's not just a little bit of misalignment. That's a lot of misalignment. But that's one part. And the other is understand, again, the why of what the engineers want to build, and build them into the planning for the team. Is it for higher quality? Again, we talked about before, go from that higher quality to why. What benefit does that give to the customers, to our efficiency, to various things? Or they want to solve like scaling problems. Do we have a need for that? Can we save money by building a more efficient system? Is that a good enough reason? Is the opportunity cost worth it to the company? And involve your engineers in that thinking of taking problems that they're excited about, and then translate that excitement into actual justification of, this is why this work is important. It's not just that I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this because. So there's, yeah, in most teams that I've seen, there is a lot of space to do work that folks are excited about, and there are folks who will do whatever it takes because they understand the business imperative. So your job as an eng manager is try to balance those things, and to another tool is basically to talk about and do more future-oriented planning. That you're excited about this. This is where it fits. Maybe we're not doing it today. We can do it at this time, or when this condition becomes true. So that's another piece that comes up.
There you go. So again, kind of themes of involving people, having the conversation, like questioning things that maybe weren't naturally questioned before. All of that seems are kind of the bits and pieces of that I take away. We have literally like one more minute, but actually in the spirit of equity, I'm dropping down a little bit lower on the list, and particularly because Black Lives Matter has been a very big movement that has had a lot of conversations started these days. When people think about goals related to diversity and inclusion, I know we don't have much time, but in kind of the quick version, do you have any types of tips or advice or things that people might benefit from hearing on that topic, useful?
Yeah. I mean, it's an important topic. It's something where so I lead the Gradient, which is our people of color employee resource group at Asana, and the past few weeks have been weeks of a lot of conversations around what we can be doing. And yeah, so we have diversity and inclusion goals. They come from a belief that it's an important business priority in addition to the right thing to do. So when talking about diversity and inclusion, I think it has to start there. You have to figure out why you're going for diversity and inclusion. And unless you have that belief from a business standpoint that this is an important goal, it is going to get deprioritized. So you have to start there. And then I think that things that we've learned from observing tech more broadly is that you should try to solve inclusion first. You try to make sure that the people that you have hired, they are thriving, or you are trying your best to make sure they thrive and setting up an environment where they can. So this includes anybody who's underrepresented. You should start with an assumption that there are folks like that who don't quite feel fully included in everything you're doing, and to make people successful and to make your organization successful, it's important to start there. And then, this is a very big topic. I don't think
I know. I regret not giving it more time, candidly, but I appreciate you sharing. I mean, the idea of starting with the people internally as that first step, as opposed to just hiring goals without even looking at your folks internally, that's really important. We talked about a lot. I wish we could talk about this more. Again, I apologize for not bringing it up sooner. But thank you so much. We've hit our time, Prashant. It was great hearing your wisdom, your thoughts. I've learned a ton about goal setting, and it's been a pleasure to speak with you. So thank you.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for hosting this. Thanks, Mustafa, for inviting me, and hopefully the folks who joined got some value from this.
Awesome. All right, and Mustafa, back to you.
Yeah, I guess just to wrap up in 1 minute. So again, thank you so much, Prashant, for your time. We'll be sending out some notes of this video call, of this Q&A. We'll send you those notes. We'll send you a video recording. Also, we're actually working on a D&I, a diversity and inclusion Q&A that we're going to be hosting very soon. So we'll actually have a full hour dedicated to that. And again, if you're interested in our mentorship initiative to help people in the Black tech community and other members of kind of underrepresented groups, we'll be sending out more information. So that's about it from us, though. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone, and take care. Stay safe.